Top Shield, a long-form discussion podcast about musical topics both past and present. I'm Gabe, and I'm joined, as always, by Dan.
Hello.
And Darren.
Hello.
You know, I like to start each episode by asking you guys, catching up a little bit. Have you guys listened to anything interesting lately?
Yeah, Iggy Pop did a radio show for BBC about Berlin, so I listened to that, and he played a bunch of stuff. I love a lot of German music, and he played this girl I'd never heard of, Helena Hoff, and I've been listening to her first record. It came out in 2017. It's called A Tape. It's just like real kind of like minimalist techno stuff. You remember that album I liked a lot last year? It was like some Russian letters.
Yes, that crazy Russian
TPSB or something. It's sort of similar to that. It's pretty rad.
Yeah, so in an attempt to try to recover from all the Weezer I was actually listening to a lot of Beethoven this past week, and then on Sunday, Pitchfork did Nirvana's Unplugged album from 1993, so I started listening to that.
All right. I want to say, first off, rest in peace, Mark Hollis. Not that I've been listening to a bunch of talk, but I thought we should mention that. I have been kind of smitten by this album. It's this French band called Org and Yes. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right. ORGUE space AGNES. It actually came out late last year, their debut album, and it's just the weirdest. I should send it to you, Dan. Yeah. It's like this swampy, almost Afrobeat, like noise rock. It's I don't know. It's incredible. But also, the album is about 40 minutes long, which in my opinion is the perfect length for an album.
I agree.
Which leads me to today's topic. How's that for a transition?
That was good.
That was brilliant. Yeah, wow.
Less shorter than your typical Beethoven piece. But anyway, a couple weeks ago, we got an email from Jackson, who said some nice things about the podcast. Thank you, by the way. And then asked, I'd be curious to hear your guys' take on the effect that streaming and digitized music has had on the average length of new albums. I think it's fascinating that we've been getting records that range in runtime from an episode of a sitcom. It's an interesting way to put it. Like Vince Staples' FM, Pusha T's Daytona, Kanye West's Ye, etc., to that of a feature-length film or longer. Lil B's Black Ken, Julia Holter's Aviary, etc. Of course, long albums are nothing new. Has Darren still not listened to Kesto? I don't believe he has. Have you?
Well, full disclosure, I saw this and I was like, you know what? I'm going to go out there and I'm going to get this. And then I saw the little subtitle where it's like 234, and then I realized that's how many minutes the album was. And
I said, exactly.
No, thank you.
Wow, what a shame. Damn
You're missing
shame.
out.
All right, Jackson continues, but it seems like these two extremes have been somewhat of a trend lately. How does this affect the digestibility and enjoyment of records as holistic works of art? Has playlist culture completely taken over album culture? This is a big question that we've spent a lot of time thinking about and discussing off air, actually. So we thought, why not use an episode to finally get to the bottom of it? I seriously doubt we will get to the bottom of it, but we can try to hash it out. So let's start with short albums. I think we all remember last year, it felt like they were taking over. There was Kanye's Wyoming project. There's other stuff like that Jackson mentioned, like the Vince Staples' FM, but Earl Sweatshirts, some rap songs, stuff like that. It just seemed like it was really becoming a thing. So I want to start, prior to this streaming age, why do you guys think an artist would release an EP or a really short album?
Like before, it always seemed, if a mainstream band did it, it was always kind of like a B-side dump. It was it was a way to either put out songs that were only available on singles, like Nirvana has Hormoning EP, right. And it's stuff like that. It's sort of like a thing for the super fan maybe, or a way just to make all of their music available, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, that's always been my impression. Sometimes I would sort of think there would at least be one song, maybe a single, like this was just an extended single, how the EP would work.
Right.
I think Animal Collective, they did Water Curses, and the first song was great, but then the other songs you could kind of tell were throwaways, B-sides, not really meant to, there wasn't a complete idea there,
Yeah, it does kind of seem like, I don't want to get this podcast like going crazy out of control, but if we go way, way back, obviously the EP is, it's rooted in like a physical size of a record and that kind of format, those kind of formatting restrictions. And, but at least in like the CD era, it does seem like it was very much a way to just sell unused songs, and sometimes treated like glorified singles where there's like something new that's going to sell the thing, but the target market is kind of like hardcore fans, or maybe some cases like for early bands, it's like to kind of get some attention so they can get a real record deal or something. There's, but there was something about of a laziness to it, right? But we all know like really good EPs, right? So what makes an actually good EP?
I think what makes a good EP is treating it like it's an album and not, a single stump. Like, I think most people would agree one of the best EPs ever is Godspeed Slow Riot, and that is like just a short Godspeed album. Whereas like the Nirvana hormoning thing, the only people who have that are big fans, because it's a dump of B-sides and whatnot. I think like treating it like it's just a shorter version of what you normally do, or an album, is what makes it, worth listening to, worth picking up.
Yeah, I think that's important. Some of the EPs that I like, I think of one by Joanna Newsom, where she took, studio songs and recorded them in like kind of like a live studio session. So
like a live EP kind of thing then?
Exactly, yeah. So there's still like a different, they're taking these like popular songs or great songs from the album, but there's a different feel. There might not be as many like instruments and layers to the song. That kind of stuff I like.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, I remember, being young and learning about certain famous EPs, and it's all started part of this like cult of a band, like this idea of a band having great EPs or great B-sides felt like such a, incredible accomplishment. I think Radiohead was very famous for this, My Bloody Valentine, obviously. And it's still like a completionist thing, but it's sort of about this, they're so good that even their disposable stuff is good. But it does sort of like recognize the disposability of an EP. And I agree with you, Dan, that when they're not, it's when they're sort of treated like a regular album. At the same time, I kind of think that, I think it's something we'll talk about a lot, but sort of there's a part of embracing the format you're working in and using it as a strength. So, Godspeed, you're right. They kind of do sort of like a short Godspeed album, but they do this really intentional thing where it's going to be like these two tracks are going to sort of complement each other, and that's going to be the whole piece. And it's sort of like, you get what I'm saying? It's like actually embracing the limited format,
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think, you if you don't embrace it, it's gonna either turn into something where you at the end of it you're like, oh, that's it. I'm left wanting the rest of this album, or it's just gonna turn into that B-side dump feeling thing. So I think part of it is definitely embracing the limitedness of it.
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning that one in particular, the Godspeed album. Isn't that like still like a 30-minute?
Yeah, it is a little long
experience.
True.
And that's what I want to mention actually, is that because I want to determine, is this sort of trend we saw starting last year and maybe a little earlier of really short albums, is it different from what's happened in the past? Because we've always had EPs and we agree that they're usually a little lazy, but there's also been, fantastic, really short albums. Something like, I was just sort of glancing quickly at some things that came to mind, like the Ramones' first album is like 28 minutes or something.
Yeah.
Bob Dylan's Nashville Skyline, 27 minutes. Nick Drake's Pink Moon, like 27 minutes. Weezer's Green Album, not a great one, but we talked about it last week, under 30 minutes. So is something different happening between what happened back then with these short albums and what's happening now?
Yeah, because I think that, you just came up with, 4 examples over 50 years, you know?
Well, there's obviously more, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know.
Plenty of like 30-minute around there. Panda Bear's Buoys came out just recently, and that's also about 30 minutes long. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I get you, but what I'm saying is, you know, you had to look for a handful of examples in the last 50 years, whereas you also rattled off 5 examples from last year with it alone, with no problem, you know, at the top of the show.
So do you think, Darren, that it's different? That what's been happening now is different than what was happening back then?
I mean, I think so, and I think we'll get into that when we kind of start talking about, you know, the digital age and playlists and stuff, you know. I guess my thought goes to, like, Kanye West, you know, because his career has seen him with albums that have lots and lots of tracks, right? All the way up until now, where it's like he has this sense of urgency and, you know, wanting to get albums and songs out as quickly as possible. And, you know, we're getting albums like Yay and the whole Wyoming Project stuff. It feels different than, like, say, you know, Weezer just having a less than 30-minute album, or like Nick Drake, who, you know, maybe, you know, it, like, when I think of those albums, I think, like, yeah, it wasn't about urgency. It wasn't about get this out there as quickly as possible. It's like, this was all that this album needed. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Whereas nowadays, it just feels like, how quickly can we get something out there? It doesn't matter if it's 40 or 50 minutes.
So speed.
You know?
Okay.
I agree with you. And, you know, like some of those albums you mentioned, Gabe, especially like Pink Moon, you know, if you ask me how long Pink Moon is, I would probably I would guess like 45 minutes, you know. It's not like it doesn't feel short. It feels like that's what that record needed. You know, nothing feels extra or like it, you know, I'm not left wanting more or anything. So those don't like sort of feel like the EP kind of thing. And Kanye's another good example, because he's one of the, off the top of my head, one of the only people I could think of that's like from that pre-digital age. You know, like his first 2 records are deeply in that rap time of like tons of skits and
fill the whole CD.
and then the album ends, but there's like 8 bonus tracks that were never not on the CD. So, you know, so are they really bonus tracks? But he's also like, now I feel like has embraced that is not the way people do things anymore, you know, with this whole Wyoming thing. And even, you know, Yeezus is what, like 35 minutes, I think, off the top of my head.
Yeah.
You know, so like, I think he's one to, you know, embrace it and use the styles of the day, album wise, accordingly.
Well, you know, I was thinking that because, you know, something like Pink Moon, I mean, the it doesn't feel that short, but the shortness of it kind of complements like the very sparse nature of it. Like he can't, you know, he sounds like sort of defeated and fragile, and it's like he couldn't possibly sing for more than 30 minutes. He's going to go take some sleeping pills and kill himself anyway. You know, like, not to make too much light of it, but I mean, it sort of fits the theme. It's appropriate. Okay, is what I'm saying. The Green Album, same thing. It's like, you know, the literal intention is just like rifle off 10 of the catchiest songs, you know, as quickly as possible. But so I'm trying to figure out, you know, they maybe they have individual intentions, and that's not the norm, I think is what you were saying, Darren, or Dan, of albums of the past. So if this is becoming a trend, it does feel like these artists are trying to accomplish something different musically than what those short albums were trying to accomplish. Because if you think about it, you know, like you sell one copy of Weezer's Green Album, it's the same as selling one copy of, you know, Lauryn Hill's Miseducation. It's like, you know, that's the same $13 at Best Buy or whatever. You know, that's one album sale. So maybe there was a little bit more freedom. I mean, I guess, again, I don't want to get off topic, but it's like there's problems with the CD era about packing too much stuff in, but also there was a little bit more wiggle room because one CD sale is one CD sale. So who gives a shit how long it is as long as people are buying it? So nowadays we're dealing with something very different. And I like what you mentioned, Aaron. I hadn't actually thought of that, but urgency might be one reason for this, because they want to get things out fast. They want to be extremely current. Things move faster. Do you agree with this, Dan? Yeah,
I think that's a real good point. It's you know, especially with rap, there's things that get referenced on like Yay that happened, a couple weeks before, you're listening to this record. And a lot of rap does that. And I think that's one thing that I like about the genre is, it always feels real current. Sometimes it works to the disadvantage where, it doesn't hold up. But yeah, I think that's a good reason to, just drop short EP type things, because you can get them out. You don't have to wait until you've got 15, 10 good songs. You can drop 5, 6, 7 tracks.
Yeah, I think that is very interesting, because actually I was trying to figure out, and I think it's something we might talk about more, but like, why is this happening so much in hip hop specifically? And you're right that hip hop as a genre is very current and very, fast, urgent. So yeah, I find that actually very interesting. One thing is, I guess if we can try to figure out like, why else is this happening? Do you think there's a little bit of pushback against the long form albums that we'll talk about later? That seemed like it was becoming a trend as well. Like, we could stand out if we put out just like a sleek 7-track thing, and somebody's got to decide, do I want to listen to that on Spotify, or do I want to listen to this like juggernaut Drake Scorpion that's going to take me like all afternoon to finish?
Yeah, see, I think, like, especially someone like Kanye, who's, I think Kanye really looks at like something as, a piece of art or whatever, like where, as like one, a record is one item. Whereas I think like some of the other people, like maybe Drake, Migos for sure, Ray Shremmerd and all, they just make a ton of songs, and if they release them all and let you kind of make the album, like that works fine for them. Like they don't care if you like. I don't think they expect you to like listen to all 3 discs of Culture 3 like in a row. I don't think they expect you to do that. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that kind of where I was going with the whole sense of urgency, which I think hip hop has really leaned into that, because not only can you release like a proper studio album and it can be as long as you want it to be, but then, there just doesn't seem to be, I guess back in the day, it felt like there were like these cycles or like almost like seasons where a band would release an album and then you would have to wait 2, 3, 4 years before they would release another one. Whereas, I think the EP was kind of a way to try to like bridge that gap. In hip hop, they can just throw together like a mixtape, and their mixtapes can be just as good of quality as like a proper studio album. So it seems as though they're just releasing something every single. It seems like Drake releases something every single year, and he does.
It's like you got to stay. Yeah. It's like you got to stay in the eye. Before, when somebody took a couple years off, or like when Dylan didn't release something for a couple years, after 66, like that was like mysterious. Like, where'd he go? Yeah. And then when he finally comes out, with John Wesley Harding, everybody's like going crazy. But now, if Migos takes 2 years off, nobody's gonna people are just gonna kind of forget, because somebody will fill that place, just because it is nothing against Migos. I love Migos, but back then, to have a record in someone's hands, you had to be on a label. It cost a lot of money to like press an album. You couldn't just do it yourself.
There wasn't as much music. There just simply was not.
No, exactly. Now anybody can record a record on their laptop and put it on Spotify. I've done it. You've done it. It's and anyone can listen to it. It's like, so like when in history has like just some guy in their bedroom had their music available at the same place as the biggest artists in the world? Never.
Yeah. And like there, the whole process of releasing an album involved like marketing and like tours and all sorts of stuff that would lead up to the release of an album, and then you have to go on after the album is released. I guess that still kind of happens today, but it's not like it used to be.
No, not at all like it used to be.
I do think that somebody like Drake he's almost like an exception, because a Drake album is an event, but for most people, your album release is not an event. You have to stay current. You have to keep releasing stuff. You have to stay in the eye, in the public eye, like you were saying. So Drake can, even though he doesn't seem to, he can take like a while off and he can develop like this huge album, Scorpion, and make it like, the album of the summer or something, whereas most people can't really do that. I want to get cynical, however. You guys seem to think, we could talk about this, you guys seem to think this is a genuine trend, that maybe we will see more of this. My opinion is a little different. I'm going to totally screw up the order of this outline because after we made it, I had sort of a change in my thinking about this because I thought these were two distinct phenomena, the short album and the long album. But in fact, I think they're not that different. I think that we talked about the long album being to gather streams because you now get album sales based on streams, even if it's all on one song. Sicko Mode is probably 99% of the streams on Astro World, Travis Scott's album, and that album's like, multi-platinum because people are just streaming Sicko Mode over and over again, and that's it. So that's certainly changed things and maybe inspired some people to just put out huge albums with a bunch of songs and hope that some of them hit and get a bunch of streams. We're going to talk in a little while about Ray Shremmerd and their very long album, but they treated it a little differently because they divided their last album into basically 3 albums, one by each member and then one of them together as a duo. Here's what I think. The Wyoming Project by Kanye is kind of the main reason that we think short albums are a trend. And it is actually more like Ray Shremmerd's album than a bunch of short albums. The idea was to build a bunch of hype for this 5 albums in 5 weeks thing. It's basically a quintuple album because if you're listening to the first one, you're going to check out the next one. The hype like builds. And the idea is the same as Ray Shremmerd. Divide, basically the new good music album into 5 7-track albums and get all those streams, get all that hype. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, you've proved it. Kanye, a genius. That's once
it's
again.
Smart.
No,
it's
but really
very smart.
I never thought of it that way, but that makes 100% sense, honestly. Because he drops his own album first, so obvious, or Daytona was first, which was first. The little appetizer. A lot of people were looking forward to it, but maybe not the mainstream. Your mom doesn't care about Pusha T, but and then
he might even have sensed that it was the best album. I really believe that he thought, okay, this is the best one. I'll put it out first, and then people will be like, damn, he's on fire this summer.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. And then he drops his record. You're definitely going to check the next one out, and and then because like the Nas record and the Tiana Taylor record, like, everyone already kind of forgets about those and doesn't really talk about them, But we all still listen to them once or twice, Whereas, if Tiana Taylor wasn't involved with this at all, I probably never would.
Even if Kanye produced it, even if Kanye produced her whole record, I would probably not have checked it out.
I probably would have checked it out once and no more. But like now, I've listened to it a lot,
Do you agree with me, Darren, on this?
Yeah, I think I think that whole thing comes from, you remember the hype behind like what was it, Good Friday, like the Good Music Fridays?
Right.
Prior to Dark Fantasy, where you just were looking forward to, Kanye said like, yeah, every Friday we're going to release something, yada, yada. Like, I think that was, the start of an idea, and then we see it kind of completely fleshed out with him announcing 5 albums, 5 weeks, or whatever, like, here's what to expect, get hyped, you know what I mean? Like, like that kind of thing just doesn't happen. It happens in other, other types of media, right? Because you get like trailers for a blockbuster movie, you get, trailers for a big video game or something like that. So you build up a lot of hype. But in music, it's kind of like, new album's coming out sometime later this year. No details. You know what I mean? But like, this
because even the single, the single used to kind of be the trailer of a record. And now, a lot of records you'll get a single, and sometimes you don't get anything until the album's out. We didn't get anything from those Kanye records until they were out. Nothing from the new like Offset record came beforehand. Right. Like there weren't any singles. So you're right. There's no trailer, no sneak preview, whatever.
Yeah, and so basically, I felt like a bunch of people were talking about the Wyoming project as if it was like, wow, it's totally a reaction against the super long album. He's like standing out. But I really felt like it had more in common with the long album than not. And here's more evidence, okay, for my theory. All right, we got a couple other examples of the short album last year. Earl Sweatshirt, Some Rap Songs, okay? This album is fucking brilliant because it's 5 minutes long or whatever, 24 minutes long, but 15 tracks. That's 15 tracks of streaming that are like a minute and a half long. It streams as much as any regular length album, but it's way shorter. Here's another example. Tierra Whack. Remember her?
I was just going to say that.
15 minutes, but it's 15 songs, 1 minute long each, okay? She is racking up that streaming money. I salute her. What a goddamn genius. You too, Earl Sweatshirt. I mean, this is all about streaming numbers. The short album is somehow also about just gathering streaming numbers.
Our next drone record, we're every minute we're cutting out new track. We're gonna make millions off this.
We should.
We really should. Not even joking.
Do you agree with us, Darren?
I mean, I think it's I guess it's a good, business decision, I suppose. But, I kind of feel like it. Yeah, I actually like that Earl Sweatshirt album.
I love it
as well. But, the idea of making like a 15-track album, one minute each, I don't know, kind of dilutes
that's
things
gimmicky
for me a little bit, Yeah.
That seems intentional, intentionally financial.
I've got another example for you though. The last Godspeed record, Luciferian Towers. It's like four actual songs, but they're all split into like, part 1, part 2, part 3.
Yeah.
And it ends up God, what happened?
I think we're going to see a lot more of this. And I almost wonder if we're not going to see, like songs divided into like, this is one
Kanye
song.
did it.
It's like
Wolves. He changed, like the Frank's part is at the is a separate track now.
Pablo went from like 15 to like 20 tracks by the end of it.
Yeah. See, he knew what was up. But I think eventually we're going to see songs that are like, it's just one song, but it's like the first verse and chorus are the first track, and then the other, rest of the song is another separate track or something like that. To rack up these streaming numbers. But, it also kind of, and we'll get into this a little later, but that also kind of goes against the playlist culture where people want to be able to add stuff to their playlist. I would say that it's actually hard to add anything from Earl Sweatshirt's album to your banger playlist because they're like kind of really short and doesn't, it needs to be like a whole piece.
Out of context, they don't work.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, that's another thing that I thought was interesting as I was thinking about this is that, some of these albums, which I really like a lot. Well, basically, so my original point was, I don't even know if this is really a trend because there's only a couple things and it feels like a trend, but I think it's more in line with the long album. The other sort of maybe contradictory point is that a lot of people were concerned that the digital age would kill the album, in fact, though, it seems like the album has a lot of power still because, if you try to think about the history of the recent history of the short album, okay, like the EP as album, I think about like, I don't know, something like Kendrick's Untitled Unmastered, okay? This was kind of like an old school, it was like the halfway point between an old school EP or, something like that and the modern day short album because he was a little bit like non-committal about what it was, he wouldn't be like, this is my follow-up to Pimp a Butterfly. Like he wouldn't say that, right? And that's kind of the old model because EPs were kind of like, maybe it's like clearinghouse for old stuff. Maybe it's even sometimes trying something a little new, but you don't want it to have the weight of your next album.
Right.
You know what I mean?
It's like it doesn't count. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't count. If it goes wrong, it doesn't count, whatever. So there was a little bit of that to that album, to that whatever it is, Untitled Unmastered, okay? But there was also a little bit of a, this is meant to work like a complete piece, It's short, but it's a complete piece. And what's happened since is that these artists have just started saying, all right, these short things, I call it an album. You know, they've embraced this word album, and it's maybe because people take that word very seriously still. You know, it means this is a big statement. So if Earl Sweatshirt dropped some rap songs and was like, it's my next quote unquote release, people would be like, oh, what is this? It's probably like unfinished stuff and it's cool, but it's like, you know, but when he's like, no, this is my album.
Yeah.
People are like, I'm going to take this seriously as a work of art, no matter what length it is. You know what I mean?
When you say this is an album, you're saying this one counts, you know?
Yes.
This is in my discography. And the thing rap does a lot to avoid that is the mixtape.
Yes.
You
exactly.
know, mixtape used to mean something completely different. I don't want to, you know, this is a whole nother podcast, but, you know, mixtape used to mean something completely different 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And now it means an album that doesn't count. You know,
can we talk about that for a second?
Because
Because like, I want to know if what I thought a mixtape is actually accurate. Like, I used to think that it meant like you would take beats from another song and like,
that's what it used to mean.
Write your own other rap.
Well, that's like way old, but there would still be like, there could be stuff that was new.
Right.
Then you start to get into the world of like, you know, Chance's first albums, Chance the Rapper. You know, they're like mixtapes because they're like new original works. Maybe not all the samples have been cleared, but it's like, I don't know, it's not an official release because it's sort of commercial.
It used to mean like I'm not selling this because there's uncleared samples on it. You know, whether that was using, you know, just the straight beat from another song or something like Chance or you know, like the first Death Grips. It's sampling things that you can't get clearance for, but. You know, now it just is an album.
Well, yeah, but I think there was a little bit of a development there, which is that originally it was kind of like they're half-ass things.
No, I agree. Yeah,
you know, and then people started taking them a little more seriously because they were like, okay, you could sort of like build an independent movement with like really good mixtapes you've worked hard on. And again, we're just jumping all over. We're just going to completely shit all over this outline that we made. I think that's fine. But you know, I was thinking about like Drake's "If You're Reading This Too Late." You're too late, okay? It's too late, whatever the fuck it's called. You know what I'm talking
about?
Yeah. Whoever is too late. Somebody is too late when they're reading this. So this is the first time that I remember a thing being called a mixtape, but just being sold in stores like any other album, right?
Yeah, that record in particular, I don't understand. That really is like the first big one that it was just $15 in iTunes, you know, whatever.
Yeah, it was just. But that thing is, that's the power of the word album because he didn't want it to be his proper follow up to what was it? Take Care? Was that the one before? Or no, it was the Nothing Was the Same or whatever. I think. He didn't want it to be his proper follow-up. He didn't want it to be his like fourth studio LP, you know? So he just called it a mixtape, sold it like a regular record, and people treated it like, wow, you know, nobody held it against like his masterworks from the previous couple years. Nobody was like, well, this isn't as good and conceptually grand as his previous stuff. This is just fun. It's a bunch of bangers. It's just a mixtape, so... You know, it's dope. It's like that thing. It had the same effect of like when you hear a Radiohead EP and you're like, wow, their EPs are good. You know, like even the shit that they throw away is good. I mean, that's like the same mystique that Drake is building by just calling what is literally an album a mixtape. You know, I mean, it's just interesting how in this modern streaming era, when all these things were supposed to not mean anything anymore, terms like album and EP and mixtape, they still mean a lot. They're just used in a different way.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess like if that thing like totally flopped, he could have been like, well, you know.
Yeah,
just a mixtape, you know, no big deal.
No, 100%. It's like a safeguard. I think he fucked up because that album's actually really good. That's the only Drake album I actually like.
It might be his best album.
Yeah, it is. But I mean, people like Young Thug did it with Barter 6. That was supposed to be his debut record, and at the last minute, for some reason, he wussed out and he made it a mixtape. And I think that's one of the best albums in the last 10, 15 years. And he still technically has like not released his debut album. You know,
right.
You know, he's been around for 10 years, you know?
Yeah. So, you know, basically that's my theory, is that this is not actually that much of a trend. It definitely, the short album introduces some interesting ideas about what is, the power of these words still. But, Darren, do you agree with me? I mean, do you think that we're going to see like more short albums? I mean, it's not like I have a perfect explanation for everything, because Vince Staples' FM is literally short. It's not like gaming the streaming thing like Tierra Whack is. It's funny because it's basically an EP, because he released the Prima Donna EP, but in the years, like the 3 years since, it was like, it became acceptable to call a short album an album and treat it like a big statement. So, I mean, I'm kind of skeptical, but Darren, do you think that we're going to see more short albums?
I think we are. I sometimes I feel like I'm always trying to come from like a business angle for some reason, but like I can imagine, people, executives, whatever, they see the trends. They understand at least the fact that people's attention spans are shortening, and that music is vying for attention, against other platforms that never existed before, YouTube, whatever, like whatever's on your phone, right? And so in order to compete, you've got to change things up. And the trend right now is like, how quick can you get an album out? How short can it be that still delivers like some sort of statement, you know what I mean? Can keep somebody's attention long enough to listen to it, right? There will always be the outliers, or the ones that are going to kind of stick to the good old tradition. I think of like Joanna Newsom, for instance, who doesn't release an album. She releases an album like maybe every 4 or 5 years, and she's not streaming anywhere. And if she does release an album, it's usually like 70 or 80 minutes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And her fans eat it up. She may not be earning any new, or too many new fans, right? Because her albums just continue to get more challenging and complex. But yeah, I think the trend is going to stick with this short album, and it may just get shorter and shorter. We may never even hear of EPs anymore, because basically anything that you release, a collection of songs, is just going to be deemed an album. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I mean, is it even a bad thing? Like, EP, like, it means extended play, and it harkens back to vinyl. Frequently are 10 inches. It's like now there's no, you don't have to fill 12 inches. You don't have to fill 7 inches. It doesn't matter. Like you're not making anything like that physically exists. So like, does the term, EP, is it just completely antiquated and out of date anyway? Does it even matter?
Yeah, I think particularly the term EP doesn't matter, but the other terms certainly do.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of what we're saying, we'll get into this later, but a lot of what we're saying applies really specifically to like mainstream sort of commercial music. Experimental music and stuff has always played with extreme lengths. We were just talking about Kesto earlier, for different reasons that maybe we can talk about. But yeah, I do sort of wonder in the mainstream if we're going to get more of these short things. And even if like even if the original intention was maybe a little bit more cynical, like this, how to gather streams, how to build momentum, how to get people to take stuff seriously, like because that's the thing I can't get my head around, is like the CD was great. Well, I guess way back in the vinyl era, the EP, and that carried on through the CD era, was great because you could dump a bunch of like unused stuff and make some money off it. Okay. In the CD era, we've talked a little bit about this, how, bonus tracks become this big problem, but this way that, labels like sell the same album to you again or something, it's like, and then as you kind of like get into music that just only existed in the CD era, you start to see these like really padded, specifically rap albums, I think of, but basically everything, where it's like, it's almost like you're just putting the bonus tracks in the album already.
Right.
And just, even if you don't call them that. So if in the streaming era, it's like, all right, we got to be fast, we got to release stuff quick. It's okay to release something short as long as you call it a capital A album. What are people going to do with their bonus tracks? Are they going to pretend like they're albums now, or what?
I mean, I hope that this is going to finally kill the bonus track. I cannot stand when basically any record I download, to my phone from like Spotify. If it's old, I always look it up on Wikipedia to see what the actual tracks are if I don't know off the top of my head, because I fucking hate bonus tracks, and jazz albums are the worst. Don't get me started, but. I hope that this is going to kill it, because the reason for the bonus track was we're selling it to you again. Why would you buy Kinda Blue again? I've had it on vinyl for 40 years. Well, now you can hear, 9 different takes of So What? That's how they sold it to you back then. But now in the streaming age, every time I listen to it, you're selling it to me again, Maybe not for quite as much money. A CD was one, if I bought it and listened to it one time, you got $15 no matter what. Whereas, now if I it'll take 100 times for me to listen to it before you get that, probably more. But, it's like they don't need to sell it to you again. I think now we might see more maybe kind of sort of compilation things, like those longer EPs where it's like, this is the stuff cut from such and such, or we're going to get things like Migos and Ray Schremer where they that's everything they recorded that was of any substance whatsoever, and there are no bonus tracks because this is everything. I think it's already split between those two, and that's how I think it will stay, at least until something new comes along.
Yeah, I mean, I think the effort now is to try to stay relevant. I go back to that sense of urgency for, bands and hip hop artists. They release a great album, but, it's all about the follow up. It's all about how quickly can you stay in the topic of conversation. If you wait too long, you're gone. You're old news. So use these bonus tracks as a way to bridge the gap, call it a mixtape or call it a compilation. Like you mentioned, Dan, release some live tracks, whatever it takes. I think that's what we're going to end up seeing, and we were talking about those bonus tracks. What else used to really bother me is like when there would be like store exclusives, right? So like you get your Weezer album at Walmart, you get one extra bonus track.
I hid that from my mind.
God, I cannot.
One of the worst ones was Blink-182, Take Off Your Pants and Jacket.
Oh, yeah.
There was like, and nobody email me if I'm wrong, but there was like 5 different bonus tracks, and there was only one per record. And if I'm remembering correctly, you didn't even know which one you got until you bought it. And it was like whatever picture was on the CD, I think.
I think there were 3, and it was like one for each member, like written by each member.
That makes sense. But it was like you had to buy the album. It was like trading cards,
had to.
You had to buy.
And you had to because otherwise you would miss out on the genius of I Want to Fuck a Dog in the Ass. The other song was like, it was just like fucking and coming and something like that.
Oh, and then, it's Mother's Day.
They were like, you had to buy them because they were masterpieces you were missing. Okay, so the other question I want to ask is, I guess maybe this should have been like one of the first questions, but can short albums be a good thing? I mean, can they be just as good as albums of traditional lengths? I think about like Kanye's Ye. We had a lot of problems with that, and I kind of felt like it was because he was trying to make like a big grand statement on such a short scale. It was like, I'm going to make my beautiful dark twisted fantasy in 7 tracks, and it just was like conflicting. So can there be great masterpieces that are like 20 minutes long?
I think there can be, and I think there are. The problem with Ye, I agree with you. He was trying to do something too grand for too small of a space. But Yeezus, I think it's 35 minutes, is depending on the day, sometimes my favorite Kanye record. But I think there's plenty of things that work super well that are short. The Ramones' first record you mentioned, that's a 10/10 perfect classic, and I wouldn't want it to be any longer. I thought Earl's record was really good. I think if you're playing to the strengths of the short album, you're not trying to do something outside of the scale. You're not trying to make a giant full length and jam it into 20 minutes. I think it definitely can. I thought Daytona did a great job, sticking with the Wyoming things.
Sure.
Daytona, I don't think Daytona is a minute too short or a minute too long. It is like a perfect record. So I think it can be done. I think it's maybe a little more difficult though. But
the flaws stand out even more.
Exactly. When an album's an hour, you can forget. At the end of it, you're like you kind of forget the little tiny things you didn't like maybe here and there, and you just remember the grandness.
You're like, for example, like "Lying in a Coma" is a shitty song, but I forget all about it because
let's not bring that back up. But yeah, no, I mean you're joking, but yeah, that's kind of the thing. If there's one or
that's the idea.
If there's one or two songs that are like not bad, but they're just not as good, you sort of forget about it after 60 minutes. Whereas if you have a 7-track album and just one of those songs is bad,
better be fire.
Yeah, exactly. It's gonna sound like shit.
What do you think, Darren?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can definitely be done. Again, I think that I have to stress that there should be a fair amount of time spent even on these short albums making sure that these songs are complete thoughts. I mean, I love Yeezus, but it's a pretty stark contrast to like the amount of time that Kanye spent on Dark Fantasy. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And then that got even shorter. That amount of time got even shorter with like Yay. It felt like writing lyrics. Right. Days before
it was like
the release of the
2
album.
Weeks.
Yeah, I mean that's just it's so different compared to like my understanding of Dark Fantasy, which was like months and months of just crafting this piece of work.
Right.
Sure,
right.
you could. Why couldn't you do that same thing for 7 tracks, 8 tracks? You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah, it's just weird because when I think about Ye, it's like he tried to do the same almost redemption arc where it's like he's like evil and thinking about killing you and stuff in the beginning, and then it's like by the end it's like I feel I've got the whatever Ghost Town is chanting and it's all like glorious, and then he's got this daughter, but it's like it was too short. I mean, Yeezus is like short, but it plays like a punk record. It's got like the energy and the abrasiveness that would get tiring, so it really uses its short length the best possible way. Before we move on to long albums, maybe this is impossible to answer. I really couldn't think of anything, but I thought it was like a fun thing to think about. Can you think of any like earlier artists that really would have thrived in this era? Like if it was okay, I think like, I just think of like the kind of so many artists were probably just ruined because they lived in an era when you had to pad the rest of the CD. And might have been really fucking great if they live now and could just release like the perfect 20 minutes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I spent like a lot of time trying to think of that. And, I think like a lot of like rap stuff would have greatly benefited from, cutting out skits, cutting out, whatever dumb remix or something that was like jammed onto a record. Even records that are really great could be cut down, like Ice Cube's like America's Most Wanted. It's a super great record, but there's some skits that are dumb, and a couple songs here and there I'd cut. Death Certificate too. But yeah, I can't think. I was trying to think of like a rock artist, and
I mean the problem is that it's going to be artists that we don't remember because they were never good. Right?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I was trying to think of a rock artist, and I can't think of it, but I was thinking that's basically because I never listened to them because they suck.
Well, I mean, I would think that bands in the 60s, in the Beatles era, where songs were 3 minutes and less than 3 minutes, could have potentially have benefited because the whole album would have just been 10 songs that were just 2.5 minutes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I was thinking about stuff like, like, I don't know, something like 50 Cent, his debut album, Get Rich or Die Trying.
That's a good one.
It's like, 25 songs, and it's just a bunch of shit. But there were like, you remember there were like 5 perfect singles off of that album. If there was just like one 20-minute album, oh my God, it would be the greatest rap album ever made. Okay, so let's move on to long albums, even though we've already been stepping all over this topic. Let's start at the beginning again. In the past, before the streaming era, why would an artist make a very long album, a double album, sometimes even a triple album? Like, what are they trying to accomplish?
That's a hard question to answer outside of like experimental music. You know, experimental music has always just sort of been like, you know, outside the rules. You know, it just doesn't apply. But you know, I was thinking like the Minutemen, double nickels on the dime. Is that a double or a triple record? I think it's a double, but it might be triple. But you know, whatever. It's like long as hell. And we reviewed that on the old podcast like a couple years ago. And I think we all, if I remember correctly, we all kind of just thought it was like a little too, like if it was shortened, it would have been really great. But there's a lot of filler and stuff. And so like I was kind of thinking like, you know, why did they do that? You know, because really, honestly, they could have like with that record, you know, they could have cut half the mediocre stuff and half the really good stuff and put it together and make two really good records. You know, you could have like separated
but how about like Daydream Nation? In my opinion, and I hope, you know, to shit it's in your opinion also, a perfect album. I think every song is perfect.
I think that falls in the experimental category a little bit.
I guess so, but they just made Sister. So why would they be like, all right, let's do Sister, but make it big? I mean, it's to make a statement, right?
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Yeah, Daydream Nation's a real good one. Yeah, I mean, it's got to be to make a point. You know, like that is a big. It's a big gamble. You know, even the White Album to release like this giant record as a pop band that's like Darren said making 2.5-3 minute songs. You know, to release this giant record of, you know, full of things that are very different from like the record preceding it and all. You know, it's brave. It's a big gamble, a big risk. I think that's the, you know, maybe. Yeah, I think Daydream Nation's
high stakes. What do you think, Darren?
Yeah, I mean, I like to think that it's also a way to try to change things up, right? Especially for bands that have a very like unique sound. You know, I think of like, like Pavement, like Wowie Zowie was a double album, right? Double.
Yeah.
You know, very distinct sound. You know, I can imagine like the challenge of trying to top, you know, one record after another, and instead of attempting to do that, why not just kind of open up the floodgates and try a lot of stuff? And we always talk about that like sort of White Album style of a double album where you don't really cut anything off of the record. You just you allow all the ideas to stick. You know what I mean? I think it is like an experimental thing. I think it was a way of like just trying to try different things, but also still include, you know, stuff that you're known for, stuff that you're great at. You know what I mean? That's why we always end up, not always, but a lot of times we end up talking, man, if they just cut some of these tracks, they'd have a perfect record or whatever, you know?
Yeah. I mean, you know, so I guess there's a couple different reasons. Sometimes I think it's to make a big statement, like, you know, Daydream Nation feels like that. Like, you know, we're here. We're gonna like, we're like the band. We're your favorite band. We're the most important band that's ever, you know, lived or whatever. And, you know, to kind of like really do it. You know, something like maybe not necessarily like a big statement like that, but like Pink Floyd's The Wall. The idea is to like kind of make a big statement. It's like, you know, to make a big concept album that's like tells a big story, you know, like be big. But then there's also those double albums that are about like sprawling out or experimenting and getting weird. Wowie Zowie, the White Album, you know, stuff like that. I don't know. Black Foliage and Dusk at Cubist Castle by Olivia Tremor Control. It's like explore. Here's a big world to explore all over the place, you know. And yeah, there are other reasons with the in the experimental side of things, but yeah, there are a couple of reasons. So I guess those are the things, you know, that make them successful, right? Is that when they really use the size to their advantage. So do you think that recent long albums, you know, I think about stuff like, we've talked about them already, but like Drake's Scorpion, you know, if we're sticking to popular music, Migos's Culture 2, or, you know, whatever. But also stuff like, maybe this is too experimental, but like Swan's last couple albums have been like absolutely fucking huge.
Well, Joanna Newsom did a triple album.
Yeah. I think, you know, Arcade Fire did a double album, you know, but like, is this new trend of these like super long albums, particularly, like stuff like Migos and Drake, different from these other double albums that we've already been very familiar with?
Yeah, I think totally. Migos and Drake, Ray Shrimmer, those records are records that are gaming the Spotify number system. And in fact, like just like an hour before we started recording, I watched Offset was on that Hot Ones show.
Oh, yeah.
And I watched this episode, and he talked about how he's like obsessed with the analytics of like music and all, which I thought was pretty interesting. So like that really, when a member of the band like literally says that he's like always watching this kind of things, it makes sense. They're trying to sort of game the system rather than make like some, I don't think Migos is like, it's gonna be like the White Album, we're gonna experiment. Right. I think it's just like, we'll release everything, maybe a song or two will be a big hit, and if it's not, if 100,000 people listen to 20 of our songs, that's 200,000 plays or whatever. I'm not good at math. And they make a shit ton of money, no matter what. I think like there's two different like camps of the long album, and it's the game in the playlist kind of thing, or the experimental. Like you said, like Swans, like Gerard's not like, I'm gonna get on some fucking playlists and make a shit ton of money. Like I don't think he cares. If the song ends up being 30 minutes, it's 30 minutes.
And like Joanna Newsom or Arcade Fire did this as well. Those albums, they would have fit on, in Arcade Fire's cases, I think 1 disc, and on Joanna Newsom's,
I fucking hate when
2
people
discs.
do that.
Okay, but
that could be a game. That could be a game though too, because CDs. If we're going back on CD game, if a double album counts as 2 sales, a triple album counts as 3 sales. Whatever.
Right.
So it is a little bit of a game,
little gamey. But I always thought of it as kind of like an artistic decision, which Drake's decision to put 1 disc of like banger rap tracks and 1 disc of like mopey R&B is not in any way some kind of like artistic setup.
Exactly.
Ease of playlist inclusion. But so you agree, Darren, that this is kind of like a different thing that's happening?
Yeah, I think so. I can't really think of a hip hop artist that I would equate to, the double albums of old. You know what I mean? To me, it really does seem like make an album or a double album because I'm going to have a lot of tracks and I'm going to get a lot more streams. You know what I mean? While I do agree that Joanna Newsom's triple album didn't have to be a triple album, I think that she is attempting to make, or was attempting to make, an artistic statement, whereas Migos and the others just simply were not. So there's a pretty stark difference.
But I think another thing you have to consider when you're looking at older stuff is like, some things that we think of as double albums fit on 1 CD, but when they were released on vinyl, they didn't, because things like everybody considers My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy just a regular 1 disc album, but on vinyl it's 3 discs. So is that a triple album? Because if the Who released a record that was the same length, it would have been a triple record. But it's just because of what year it came out, it's considered just a 1 disc thing.
I think it's more about like the intention, and I think that's why like I would still consider Joanna Newsom's album a triple album. And by the way, I think that album is so good that it deserves 3 sales for every 1 sale it gets. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I forgot to mention this, but if you think about it, the physical constraints have always sort of determined the shape of music, and I guess that's a big main point here, is that streaming is radically changing that, because even, the 40-minute album is like the ideal album in a lot of people's minds, and that's just because the vinyl record has 2 20-minute sides, basically. But that also sort of shapes things, because most artists would construct an album that like has 2 20-minute kind of segments. There's like an intended breather. We kind of peak and crescendo once and then we like do it again. That's the whole story of the album, because you actually have to flip the thing over. In the CD era, that gets all warped and wonky, but people for the most part seem to kind of stick to that like 40-45 minute idea. Some albums get really long. I think we could do another podcast one day on why rap specifically is always changing so much. I mean, in the 90s, rap albums get so long, and now they're getting really long and really short again. But, so now that everything's freed up and streams are determining everything, I mean, I think that, I don't know. I feel shitty about just saying it, but it seems like a lot of mainstream artists are not interested in any kind of like artistic reason behind it. They just want the streams. Now, what about, I don't know if we even need to get into this that much, but I just want to at least acknowledge that the experimental minimalist tradition of like super long pieces or super long albums, I think is different from this discussion. I think about stuff like Philip Glass's Music in 12 Parts or something. Mm-hmm. I think there might be a few interesting things to say about Autechre, but a little bit later. But, do you agree with me, Dan? Like, this is just not the same.
No, it just doesn't.
trend.
It doesn't. It's in a different set of rules, like I sort of said before. You think of something like Lamont Young's The Well-Tuned Piano.
Yeah.
If The Well-Tuned Piano was 40 minutes, it would not have the same effect as it being, however, 5 hours or whatever it is.
How about this, though?
It's part of the thing.
Yeah, or like a Wagner opera is meant to be huge.
Exactly.
So like the size has to be huge.
Yeah.
But this is my question is, do you think that's happening? Because we talked about how short albums use the power of the word album. Long albums seem to kind of use their power as well, which is that, Migos or Drake or somebody, they know that they can make like a big splash if they drop a huge album. Like everybody will be talking about it, and they can maybe stand out a little bit by being like, here's a big album. Like listen to it all summer. I mean, Darren, do you think there's any intention there? Like size, in the same way as the like minimalist tradition, size used as kind of like a, you got to take this seriously. It's big. It's a big project,
I mean, I don't. Not from like the hip hop perspective, because I remember whichever one of those Drake albums that we ended up reviewing on the old show, like
Views.
Remember hating how long it was. You know what I mean? Like, and how.
But maybe the bubble's been burst, right? Because when he announced it, I was like, holy shit. This is going to be like his magnum opus because it's fucking like an hour 30. It's like he's making a big statement here. This is like his late career masterpiece.
His sequence, he didn't even care about sequencing, basically. You can mix the album up however you wanted. It was a playlist, basically.
Yeah, and it was almost like he took advantage of the history of the big album, which like adds weight to the release, and it turns out it was just like a kind of scam, and now we all know it's a scam. So when Migos releases Culture 2, nobody went into that thinking like, all right, they've decided to make their masterpiece. Here it is,
Yeah. So what does it mean? What does it mean now then? Like when people say, "Yeah, I got a double album on the way or triple album on the way." When you look at it on Spotify, it's 20 or 25 tracks. There's not even, you don't even know where the first album ends anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know.
That's true.
Completely. You don't know. It's even hard when you listen to like, older stuff that was meant to be, like the White Album doesn't look like a double album anymore. Yeah, it just looks like an album.
You go from Julia to Birthday, and it's like,
there's no.
I really hate that actually.
No, I agree. I completely agree. Like I think there's plenty of records from the past that even, especially double records, but even just single records that like really benefited from that. You have to pause in the middle of it, stop and go pick it up and flip it over. There was like
or how about this? You head to school and you got to pick which disc to put in your CD player to carry around all day.
I spent a lot of time deciding which one or two CDs I would bring with me. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to sound like some, old man that, back in my day, but there was something to that, to not have everything at your fingertips. Cause even, now, if I'm not like, when I get in between records, if something new hasn't come out, and I'm just like, I don't really know what to listen to, I'll spend fucking 45 minutes scrolling through, all the artists I've saved on Spotify, and I'll be like,
It's like when you try to watch something on Netflix. And
exactly. It's like, it's almost better to only have, 10 things to choose from.
But to your earlier point, I personally, and I think all people should do this, like when you're listening to an old album, figure out where side A and side B are, and just like take a mental note of that, and like recognize that you would have had to flip the thing over because it was designed that way. It was designed to be like, divided into sort of two pieces, or when you had to change discs or whatever. I mean, I think it's a goddamn shame that they erased that on Spotify.
It's basically dead, and maybe Drake and Migos and others they're just ahead of the game. They've abandoned the formatting because bands and indie groups that are still hanging on to this idea of an album. I mean, people aren't going to school with CDs. You know what I mean? They don't have to choose one album to listen to. Like, and how long is this? Can this like idea of a single album even? You know what I mean? Like, how long can it go on, or will we end up with? Because if you recall, right, Tom York during like around the release of In Rainbows was actually talking about, we're just going to release one song every once in a while.
And they did for a little bit.
One a week or whatever. Yeah. Like that was, and I honestly, I was frightened. I was like, you're telling me there's not going to be another Radiohead album ever again? He's just going to release a song every now and then?
Oh. No, I completely agree that, and this is maybe me being old, but I'm frightened of going back to, sometimes I feel like we're regressing a little bit and getting back to, pre-Beatles when the album wasn't really a thing. People release singles, maybe there'd be, albums pre-Beatles were sort of just compilations of singles and B-sides, whatnot. I hope we don't ever get back there because, like you said, Darren, if somebody releases a song that's not on a record, even like Kanye, All Day, like that's a great song, and it's it's on my banger playlist, and basically the only time I ever hear it is if people are over and we're having a cookout and I got the banger playlist on, because when do I ever just want to listen to one song randomly? And those couple Radiohead ones, I probably haven't listened to those songs since they came out because I don't have a Radiohead playlist, and I'm not going to just put on one song.
Honestly, I'm skeptical because, like I was saying earlier, I think just the word album still has a lot of power. Like, it makes people take
for now, but what about?
I think
30
it will.
years?
I think it will continue to.
I hope
it makes your batch of songs an event. I think that we will always be there, and that's what Okay, I really don't want this conversation to get completely out of control, but if you think about like the history of the album, okay, and what Sgt. Pepper's meant to the idea of the album, the reason it was so famous is because it was like the first time where it just seemed to click for people. I mean, obviously this isn't strictly true, but at least in a mainstream way, a lot of people took notice of like, hey, you can use this whole disc as like one artistic statement or whatever. And ever since, that's been sort of what people expect, and anything less is, I don't know, lazy or just less. It's just not the same artistic level. And still today, somehow that has that weight. It like carries that whole history where it's like, I don't know, if Beyonce released one song tomorrow, like, you would hear about it, but like, what would everybody react? They would say, oh my God, maybe she's got an album coming. You know what I mean? Like, still people would do that.
That's a good point. When Frank Ocean did that with Chanel and one or two other ones, everybody was like, oh, is there a new Frank Ocean record coming? And there wasn't, at least not yet.
You know what I mean, Darren?
Yeah, I think now,
people still care.
I think for now that's still a thing, but I just worry that the longer we're in this whole generation of streaming, I really worry if that the album, this concept that you're describing, will fade away,
I really doubt it. And I think also on top of that, there's always going to be people like us, there really will, that like care a lot about it.
We're already
gonna be
old,
people,
though. What's going to happen when we're
okay, there are young people just like us that are like, really anal retentive about the way their music is tagged, and like all the same shit that we do, making sure the album art is exactly right, like pissed off when Spotify only has like the they don't have the German mono pressing of Beach Boys' Pet Sounds. Like, there are always going to be people like that, and those people will always care, and there will always be music made for those people. That's what I believe. But okay, to kind of steer this back on track, the long album, we've talked about how it sucks. I want to know, is there a way to make this good? Because I think we were talking in the last section about the short album. I think there's a cynical reason behind it. Tierra Whack, Earl Sweatshirt, get as many streams as possible with very short tracks, keep people's attention. And yet, those are good albums, particularly the Earl Sweatshirt album. Great album. And this has always been the case. A lot of great albums, they take financial issues into consideration. Like, I think the Beatles, how about, like, can you believe that Led Zeppelin's Physical Graffiti, it was like an album and a half, and they were like, do we have any old shit that we could just throw on there to make it two? And then they were like, they just found it, and it's like a classic, perfect record. So financial considerations have always been a thing. It doesn't mean the music isn't good. So is it possible to make this long, streaming-friendly, playlist world album good? I think about Ray Shremmerd. Now, I don't think this was a perfect album by any stretch, but like I said earlier, they actually tried to break it up into 3 like distinct projects under the same name, and it felt more digestible because it was like them together, then their 2 like quite different styles in like short 9-song pieces. I thought that was kind of ingenious, and they got to have it both ways. Like, it's not just cheap stream shit, but they still get the stream counts. You know what I mean?
Now,
Is this possible?
I thought what they did was really smart, because, that record, I listened to the group Ray Shremmerd disc more than the 2 solo ones, and it's like, normally I would feel like a little, I'm so stuck in that album format that I like the Migos record, I like some of the songs on it, but I never feel like listening to the whole thing, so I never do. Whereas the Ray Shremmerd thing, it was like, it's one album, but it's these 3 parts, and so you don't feel bad, like, just listening to the one you like.
And some days, it would just be like, I'll just listen to, Slim Jimmy's record. And
no, exactly. It's like a get out of jail free card, it's like, you could do it. You can just listen to part of this album. It's like they're allowing you to do. You're having your cake and eating it too.
Yes, because album geeks like us can still be like, hey, that's a nice album. Like, you see what I'm saying, Darren? Like, don't you think that more people should kind of do this?
Yeah, it's the biggest difference between what you've described on Ray Shremmerd and like the Drake album is sequencing, right? They obviously took the time to say, all right, we've got all these tracks. We're going to break them up into, like a little solo here, solo there, and then us 2 together. If all of those were like intermingled, right, and they still tried to sell it as like their 3 projects, it probably wouldn't work, right? Because like it would sound as if you wouldn't be able to discern one album from the next. But it seems as though you could pretty clearly tell what portion of the album you are in. You know what I mean? If people put in that sort of effort, then I think that, album junkies like us could totally get on board with that. But I can't get on board with Drake just spewing 30 tracks that I could just hit random and would not know the difference. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that people will figure this out as they always do, and it won't mean like that all music turns to shit. I think that people will do kind of innovative things like Ray Shremmerd did and kind of work within this system.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So we've talked about, the short album, we've talked about the long album, but what is the perfect album length?
Well, I've said before that I am a big, big fan of the double album, and I particularly like ones that you were describing, Darren, where bands get like a little weird and they give you a lot to explore. So something like Pavement's Wowie Zowie is like right up my alley, where it's like they're like these big statement songs, but there's also these like little weird like nuggets just tossed off, and it's the White Album template of just a world to explore. I think that, they're uninhibited, but then there's also tight stuff, like White Album still has like While My Guitar Gently Weeps and complete classics like that. But then you get to like dig around and find like, I Will and Rocky Raccoon. It's so much fun. That is my favorite album type.
But let me ask you this, though. Both in the case of the White Album and Wowie Zowie, how much do you think the existence of prior albums, like Sgt. Pepper and for the Beatles and like Crooked Rain, like how much of that matters to how much you love the double album? You know what I mean? Because like by the time you get to the double album, you've already loved them. Like, you didn't start with Wowie Zowie, right?
Yeah, you're right. This is a good question. Yeah, because it's like you're kind of already invested. You're already like interested in exploring. I think that's interesting. And also another thought that I had that's related is that in our minds, we kind of like, how do I put this? It's going to sound like some stoner shit, but it's like we kind of create double albums in our head anyway. Or like we think of the Beatles, their whole discography, like as if it was one project sometimes. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, especially with older bands that are sort of finished, like the Beatles.
Yeah.
I can see what you mean, yeah.
The Beatles. And it's like, it's almost like, I don't know, it sounds ridiculous, but it's almost like the Ray Shremmer thing of like, the Beatles are this one huge album divided into smaller albums. Like, it's like, I don't know how to say what I'm saying. I don't know how to say what I'm saying, but it's like, I just kind of had this thought that like, that's the key to like, these big albums is like, we already are comfortable with big albums because we digest we discover a band like today in 2019, somebody's discovering the Beatles and they're going to kind of like work through their whole discography and they're going to digest the whole thing in like 2 weeks. And it's almost like it's one huge like 10-disc album or something. But if they spend enough time with it, they'll dig into every little like nook and cranny and think of them as separate but also together. I mean, that's just the I get
what you're trying to say, but I think Darren's question is a really good point, though. The Beatles like earned the White Album, Pavement earned Wowie Zowie, and I think that's how a lot of things are. To me, I think the perfect length for a record is about 40-ish minutes. It's a good enough time for outside of weird experimental things where I do love, I love well-tuned piano, I love Kesto, Autechre,
right,
those super long things. But for your normal pop record, and even maybe a little bit weirder than pop, I think 40-ish minutes is kind of perfect. It's plenty of time to fully flesh out an idea. It's not too short, it's not too long. I can hold my attention usually for that long, and I think even some experimental things work at that length. Not to say, and some pop things work longer than that. Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy is over an hour. I think it's perfect. I don't think there's a minute wasted on that record, but that's few and far between to find those examples. Even with the double album, like you came up with White Album, Daydream Nation, Wowie Zowie, stuff like that. But it's not like there's hundreds of those records. Like you can come up with maybe a dozen or something that really were good examples of it. So I think. I mean,
I think my real answer is just like there is no right length. It's like the White Album uses its long length to its to its benefit, and
that's
then
probably
some short albums. I mean, is that how you feel, Darren?
I mean. I agree with you, but if I were to pick, I would probably lean towards what Dan said, like 35 to 40 minutes. And, here's why. Like, and I think about it, it's kind of from a personal stance, but like my listening habits have obviously changed over the years, whereas the bus ride to school, I kind of knew that I had like 30, 35 minutes. So like I was kind of already naturally inclined to that length, albums that could fit in there because I wanted to hear the whole thing and be finished by the time I got to my destination. That changes a little bit. Maybe once you get to college, you kind of have more time spent maybe around a campus. I don't know, like you're listening a lot more in one single session. That shifted again once, I kind of get into like a regular job and like I can't just sit there and listen to 2 hours nonstop. Like I'm working, I have other things going on, but like, man, can I bang out like a 30-minute album or 40-minute album to focus on some task? Yes, it's perfect.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect description of it. I mean, just last night I was, a bunch of stuff about the new Swans record got announced, and I was like, I was real stoked, real in a Swans mood, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna listen to To Be Kind, and then I was like, oh, it's 11 o'clock, it won't finish till it's 1:30. I gotta be up for work in the morning. What am I thinking? And I did listen to
soft in your old age.
No, exactly. And even today at work, I was listening to a bunch of Next records because of the Swans announcement, and I had like 45 minutes before I was going to leave work, and I was like, damn, can't start the next one. It's an hour. It's an hour and 15 minutes. So I listened to something. I listened to Berlin from Lou Reed. Just something short enough that that fit in that time I had left at work.
Yeah. It's funny because I have like the opposite problem, because I'm basically just like writing a dissertation right now, and I'm like, when I'm reading, I just like to listen to music the whole time. And so whenever I'm reading about something and I'm like, oh, it's like a person like just playing vibraphones for 4 hours. Fucking awesome.
Yeah, you got 4 hours.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I meant by like that college era where, you were just like doing a whole lot of listening. You had the time.
Yeah. All right. So, there is a bunch of sort of leftover stuff that I think could honestly make its own podcast, each of these things, or at least its own podcast episode. I guess it would be insane to make an entire podcast series about some of these things. But we're getting a little low on time. So I just want to kind of like ask you guys what, are there any other last minute things we want to talk about? Some of these things that I thought of are like, we alluded to this, but playlist, mixtape, Drake released that like More Life playlist. I think it was the same idea of like, this won't be a real album. Like, don't take it too seriously. Don't get mad at me if it sucks. Other stuff I think is really interesting, like Autechre's NTS sessions, and particularly AE Live, which is another thing I've been listening to a lot lately, because they released a new batch of live recordings, and it completely fucked me up because, I thought of the album, capital A album, AE Live, as these like 9 tracks that came out in 2015 or whatever, and now like 19 more have come out, and I'm like, wait, are these like, is this the same album? Is this like AE Live 2? Is this,
even that, remember, they released an initial batch in 2015.
You're right.
And then it
was like a couple months later,
Yeah. And then now there's this third batch that's bigger than the first two combined. Yeah, that one is, and me and you, through text, like, tried to figure out how to tag it even, is it separate?
I know.
Are they separate records?
My point is like, even the NTS sessions, we were like, what is this? Is this like 4 albums, or like, is the whole thing an album? And the point is, I feel like some artists, like I don't think Kanye is really genuinely like, or Drake, is really like pushing against in an artistic way the idea of the album. I think they're kind of using the idea of the album to like sell records, or whatever. But like artists like Autechre and plenty of other artists are like, I think, actively using the digital world to play with that, to destroy those boundaries in, I think, really interesting ways. But again, I think that's a whole nother episode. Anything else that you guys think we should sort of touch on in these last couple of minutes here?
I don't think so. I mean, like you said with the Autechre, I think that they're just they live in their own. We're living in 2019. They're in 3019 or something. So I don't think you can look at them for the zeitgeist of how albums are being labeled and considered. But yeah, other than that, I think we've touched on most of it. What do you think, Darren?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if I could like summarize sort of my feelings on it, I think we've distinguished that the album, capital A album, has evolved over the decades. I think we are at the kind of at the start of a new era. I really feel like with the streaming era, I don't think I don't think we can say for sure what's going to happen, in the next 10 years. Dan made a pretty good point about the possibility of the album just disintegrating into just singles again. Gabe, you made a really strong point about there will still be people who are going to care about this thing because it has such a long legacy, and I'm more inclined to agree now that I think about it. But I think we are at like a really interesting point, and I don't know if like maybe hip hop will take its own direction, you know what I mean? And indie and rock music will just try to stick to the album trend, you know what I mean? I don't know, but
I know it's hard, right? I mean, because I was thinking we talked about this on our old podcast, because when we started our old podcast, this was like a thing, but the idea of album exclusives, like streaming platforms having exclusive albums, and that just seemed like
that was one of the first big ones. Yeah.
You're right, and we were all like, "Holy shit, we're heading into an arms race."
It was hard for us to review it because you downloaded Apple Music and like, I don't want to get anybody in trouble here, but ripped it for us so that we could review it. Yeah,
I mean, but it's just like we all had this sense like, "Holy shit, this is going to change everything," and then poof, like that fucking whole concept just vanished. There are no more like album exclusives, and it had no enormous implications that we thought it was going to have. You know what I mean, Darren? Like, who knows what's going to happen tomorrow?
Exactly. You know, and I was just thinking as you were describing that, you know, like I think when we started the first podcast, I was still using an iPod. You know what I mean? And then you guys convinced me to get. Well,
I mean, you were a little bit behind the times.
I was behind.
Let's not pretend like we started in the iPod times. we were a good 10 years past the iPod.
Okay. Jesus.
All right. Well, I don't think we solved the problem, question, whatever, at all. But, let us know what you think. We'd love to read your thoughts on the air. You can email us anytime about anything. popshieldpod@gmail.com. We'll have your next episode in 2 weeks. Probably going to be about the Doors, I think. And if you like the show, help us out by subscribing. Leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast. Stay connected. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all that junk. It's at PopShieldPod. And I guess we'll see you next time.
See ya.
So long.